A couple of years ago, I celebrated my 18th birthday with high hopes for a perfect day. My family had gone all out to make it special, a live jazz band playing my favorite songs, a dreamy outdoor setup with string lights, and even a stunning three-tier cake designed with musical notes, a nod to my love for music. For once, I felt like I mattered. My dad, James, who wasn't always the most attentive parent, had been smiling so proudly, making me feel like maybe, just maybe, I was finally being seen. As the evening unfolded, everything seemed perfect. My closest friends were there, laughing and dancing, and even my usually aloof stepsister, Mia, was being somewhat pleasant. It felt surreal to have the spotlight for a change, especially in a family that seemed to revolve around Mia. Ever since our parents married when I was 10, Mia had this knack for making everything about her. Whether it was my middle school graduation or a simple family dinner, she always found a way to turn the focus on herself. But tonight was different. Tonight was mine, or so I thought. When it came time to cut the cake, everyone gathered around, clapping and cheering as the band played Happy Birthday. I stood there, holding the knife with an ear-to-ear grin, savoring the moment. And that's when it happened. Mia cleared her throat dramatically and tapped her glass with a fork, the unmistakable sound cutting through the music and chatter. "Excuse me, everyone," she called out, her voice rising over the crowd. "I have something I need to share." My heart sank, though I didn't want to believe it. Not now, I thought. She wouldn't. But she would. "I'm pregnant," she blurted out, beaming as she grabbed her boyfriend Liam's hand. The room erupted in cheers and applause. People rushed over to her, asking for details, hugging her, congratulating her. Even my dad, who'd been standing right next to me moments earlier, immediately walked away to hug her and Liam. I was left standing there, knife in hand, as the crowd around the cake table thinned out. The jazz band played on, oblivious to the shift in the room's energy, but the party I had dreamed of was over. The focus had shifted entirely to Mia. For the rest of the evening, I floated through the party in a daze. My friends tried their best to cheer me up, dragging me onto the dance floor and making jokes to lighten the mood. But it was hard to shake the feeling of being invisible. Every time I looked over, there was Mia, surrounded by family and friends, basking in her newfound glory. Even my dad couldn't stop smiling, patting Liam on the back like he'd just won the lottery. The worst part wasn't just that she'd stolen the spotlight, it was how calculated it felt. Mia had always been good at reading a room, knowing exactly when to insert herself to maximize attention. She could have announced her pregnancy at any other time, during brunch the next day, at a family gathering, literally anywhere but here. But she chose my 18th birthday, the one day that was supposed to be about me. At one point, I found myself sitting alone at a table, staring at the untouched cake that no one seemed to care about anymore. My dad walked by and, noticing my expression, stopped. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked, his tone almost patronizing. "Not really," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She could have waited, Dad. Just for one night." He sighed, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Come on, it's big news. You should be happy for her. Don't let this ruin your night." My stomach churned. Happy for her? What about being happy for me? But I didn't argue. There was no point. My dad had always had a soft spot for Mia, and nothing I said was going to change that. By the time the party ended, I was exhausted. Not from dancing or celebrating, but from forcing a smile on my face all night. As guests trickled out, I overheard my dad and Linda, Mia's mom, talking excitedly about the baby. "A grandchild, James." Linda gushed. "Can you believe it?" I slipped away quietly, heading upstairs to my room. Once the door closed behind me, I let the tears fall. It wasn't just about the party. It was years of being overshadowed, dismissed, and made to feel like I didn't matter. I thought turning 18 would mark a fresh start, a chance to finally come into my own. Instead, it was a harsh reminder that in this family, Mia would always come first. That night, as I lay in bed replaying the evening in my mind, something inside me shifted. For years, I had swallowed my feelings, letting Mia take and take without standing up for myself. But not anymore. This was the last time I'd let her steal from me without consequences. I didn't know how or when, but I made a promise to myself. One day, I'd make sure Mia knew exactly how it felt to be overshadowed. The days after my birthday were heavy with awkward tension. My dad tried to act like nothing had happened, brushing Mia's announcement off as just bad timing. He even had the audacity to chuckle about it one morning over coffee, saying, "What are the odds, huh?" Both of you having big milestones on the same day. Yeah, I muttered, biting back the words I wanted to say. Milestone? My milestone was 18 years in the making. Hers was what? A poorly timed ovulation? I kept my mouth shut, though, knowing that if I said anything, it would just end in another lecture about family unity and how I needed to be more supportive. But it wasn't just about timing. It never was. The birthday debacle was just another item on a growing list of moments Mia had stolen from me. She had perfected the art of making everything about herself, often with a subtlety that left others none the wiser. A snide remark here, a backhanded compliment there, all added up. The worst part? She did it so skillfully that everyone else seemed oblivious, including my dad. Mia, of course, didn't see the problem. She acted like her announcement was some magical coincidence rather than a calculated move to steal the spotlight. I tried to talk to her a few days after the party, hoping to at least get an apology. I just wish she'd waited, I said, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. For what? She asked, her face painted with faux innocence. For literally any other day, I shot back. She sighed dramatically, tossing her hair over her shoulder. You're being so dramatic. It's not like I planned it this way. Besides, it's not a big deal. You still had your party. I blinked at her, dumbfounded. Not a big deal? Mia, you hijacked my birthday. She rolled her eyes. Oh, grow up. You're 18 now. It's not like you're a kid anymore. That line stuck with me. Not like you're a kid anymore. As if turning 18 suddenly made me immune to feeling hurt or overlooked. It wasn't just the words, though. It was the dismissiveness in her tone, the way she brushed me off like I was some overdramatic teenager throwing a tantrum. Things didn't get better from there. If anything, Mia leaned further into her role as the golden child. She started making more of those little comments, the kind that seemed harmless on the surface, but cut deep when you knew the context. Wow, you're still not driving yet, she said one day when I mentioned saving up for a car. That's so cute. I had my license at 16, at a family dinner. When I brought up a paper I was proud of, she chimed in with, "That's great." I remember when I was in high school, straight A's every semester. Every interaction with her felt like a competition I hadn't signed up for, and I was always on the losing end. I tried bringing it up with my dad once, hoping he'd finally see my side. "She's always putting me down," I said one night as we cleared the dinner table. "She's not putting you down," he replied, not even looking up from the plates he was stacking. "She's just outspoken. You need to stop taking things so personally." "That's easy for you to say when you're not the one she's always comparing herself to," I snapped. He frowned, finally looking at me. "Mia's not comparing herself to you, and even if she were, why does it matter? You're two different people. Focus on yourself and be happy for her." Happy for her. Those 3 words felt like a slap in the face. Why was I always expected to be happy for her while she got away with tearing me down? The resentment started to fester. Every time Mia made a comment or turned the attention to herself, I added it to the mental list I was keeping. It was like a game to her, a game where she always came out on top. And I was done playing. I started replaying all the times she had stolen the spotlight, all the moments that should have been mine but ended up being about her instead. My middle school graduation, when she got sick during the ceremony and needed to be escorted out. My first piano recital, when she decided that was the perfect time to show off her new dance routine in the hallway outside the performance room. Even my mom's birthday last year had turned into Mia Appreciation Day when she announced her engagement to Liam at the dinner table. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. But the anger wasn't just directed at Mia, it was also at myself. For years, I had let her walk all over me, smiling through the pain and telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. But not anymore. The birthday fiasco was the final straw. I didn't have a concrete plan yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let Mia get away with it anymore. This time, she'd know what it felt like to be overshadowed. She'd know what it felt like to be invisible. And when that day came, I'd be ready. 3 years had passed since the birthday that cemented my resentment toward Mia, and while a lot had changed, one thing remained the same. Mia was still the center of attention. This time, it wasn't a pregnancy announcement or her usual backhanded compliments. No, this was bigger. Mia was getting married. Her engagement to Liam was no surprise to anyone. They'd been together since college, and Mia never missed a chance to remind everyone how perfect their relationship was. The day she announced it at a family dinner, my dad practically leapt out of his chair to hug her, his face glowing with pride. Linda, Mia's mom, teared up instantly, gushing about what a beautiful bride Mia would be. Meanwhile, I sat there silently picking at my food, trying not to let my annoyance show. From that moment on, every family gathering became a wedding planning session. Conversations revolved around venues, color schemes, flowers, and bridesmaid dresses. Even the family group chat, which had once been a mix of memes and random updates, was now dominated by Mia sending pictures of wedding inspiration. "What do you think of these centerpieces?" she'd ask, as if anyone else's opinion mattered. The thought of her walking down the aisle, all eyes on her, made my blood boil. I didn't say anything, though. Instead, I quietly seethed, bottling up every ounce of frustration until it felt like I was going to explode. At the same time, my relationship with Ryan was getting serious. We'd been together for 2 years, and while we hadn't officially gotten engaged yet, we talked about it plenty of times. Ryan was everything Mia wasn't: kind, patient, and supportive. He knew all about my complicated relationship with her, and often tried to cheer me up when her antics got under my skin. One night, after a particularly frustrating family dinner where Mia spent an hour debating between peonies and roses, I came home and vented to Ryan. "I swear, if I hear the word wedding one more time, I'm going to scream," I said, flopping onto the couch. Ryan chuckled. "She does love making things about her. She lives for it," I said bitterly. Then, as a joke, I added, "Wouldn't it be funny if you proposed at her wedding? Imagine how she'd react." Ryan laughed at first, but then his expression changed. "Honestly, why not?" I froze, staring at him. "You're kidding, right? Think about it," he said, sitting up straighter. "She stole your big moment. Maybe it's time you showed her how that feels." The idea sounded insane. Even I wasn't sure if I was serious when I said it. But the more I thought about it, the more it started to feel like poetic justice. Mia had turned my 18th birthday into her personal pregnancy reveal party. Why shouldn't I return the favor? Over the next few weeks, the idea took root in my mind. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about finally standing up for myself after years of being overshadowed. For once, Mia would have to share the spotlight, and I get to see how she handled being upstaged. Ryan was fully on board, which surprised me. He wasn't usually the type to stir up drama, but he understood how much this meant to me. "You deserve to have your moment," he said one night as we talked about the plan. We decided to keep it simple. Ryan would propose during the reception, after the ceremony was over and the formalities were done. That way, it wouldn't technically interrupt her wedding, but it would still be memorable enough to make an impact. I started dropping subtle hints to my family about how serious Ryan and I were, planting the seeds so no one would be completely shocked when the proposal happened. Meanwhile, I kept my distance from Mia, not wanting to give her any reason to suspect what I was planning. As the wedding day approached, my excitement grew. This was it, the perfect opportunity to level the playing field. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control. Little did I know, things wouldn't go exactly as planned. The days leading up to Mia's wedding felt like a countdown, each one marked by a new wave of nerves and anticipation. On the surface, I played the role of the dutiful little sister, smiling through Mia's endless wedding updates and even volunteering to help with some last-minute tasks. But beneath the polite facade, I was focused on one thing: the proposal. Ryan and I had worked out every detail. He popped the question during the reception, just after the toasts but before the dancing began. It was the perfect window, not disruptive enough to be outright rude, but perfectly timed to shift the attention to us. The idea made me giddy, though I couldn't entirely shake the nerves. "Are you sure about this?" Ryan asked one evening, as we rehearsed what he'd say. I hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yes. She deserves this. She's gotten away with too much for too long." Ryan gave me a small smile. "Okay. But just remember, we're doing this for us too, not just to get back at her." I appreciated his support, though I knew my motives weren't as pure as he made them sound. This wasn't just about us. This was about me finally standing up for myself in a way Mia couldn't ignore. The night before the wedding, I found myself in the kitchen, washing dishes after dinner. The house was buzzing with activity. Mia was upstairs with her bridesmaids, my dad and Linda were double-checking the schedule, and everyone seemed caught up in the excitement. As I dried the last plate, my dad walked in. "You've been quiet," he said, leaning against the counter. I shrugged. "Not much to say. It's Mia's big day." He chuckled, but gave me a pointed look. "I hope you're planning to behave tomorrow." His tone was light, but there was an edge to it, a warning hidden beneath the humor. My heart raced, but I forced a smile. "Of course, Dad. It's her wedding. What could I possibly do?" He studied me for a moment longer, then nodded, seemingly satisfied. Good. It's important to her, you know? I nodded along, hiding the simmering resentment his comment stirred. Of course, it was important to Mia. Everything was always about Mia. But tomorrow, that would change. On the morning of the wedding, I woke up with a mix of excitement and dread. I spent extra time getting ready, carefully curling my hair and slipping into a dress that was just the right level of eye-catching, a deep emerald green that complemented my features without stealing the show. Not yet, anyway. At the venue, the atmosphere was electric. The vineyard Mia had chosen was breathtaking, with rows of grapevines stretching out under a perfect blue sky. Guests mingled with glasses of champagne, and Mia floated around in her gown, basking in the attention like the queen she thought she was. I avoided her for most of the day, sticking close to Ryan and making polite small talk with relatives. Every so often, I'd catch Mia's eye, and she'd flash me a tight smile, her way of reminding me to stay in line. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I'll admit that much. Mia and Liam exchanged vows under a canopy of flowers as the sun set behind them. For a brief moment, I almost felt guilty about what we were planning. But then I remembered my 18th birthday, the knife in my hand as everyone abandoned me for Mia's big announcement, and the guilt evaporated. As the reception began, Ryan and I exchanged a look. "You ready?" he whispered as we took our seats. I nodded, my heart pounding. The plan was in motion. Dinner was served, and the toasts began shortly after. Mia's maid of honor gave a tearful speech about how Mia had always been an inspiration and the life of every room, which made me roll my eyes. Liam's best man followed with a light-hearted roast of the groom, and the room was filled with laughter and applause. And then it was time. Ryan stood, raising his glass. "I'd like to say a few words," he began, his voice steady despite the tension crackling between us. Mia's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't interrupt. "As I've been watching Mia and Liam celebrate their love today, it's reminded me of something very important," Ryan continued, his gaze locking onto mine. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. The room fell silent. I couldn't breathe. "Mia and Liam's love is an inspiration," Ryan said, dropping to one knee. "And it's made me realize that there's no one I'd rather spend my life with than you." He opened the box, revealing a stunning ring. "Will you marry me?" The room erupted in cheers and gasps. My hands flew to my face as I nodded, tears spilling over my cheeks. Ryan slipped the ring onto my finger, and the applause grew louder. But not everyone was clapping. I glanced at Mia, whose face was frozen in a mix of shock and fury. Linda was whispering something frantically to my dad, who looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. The rest of the room, though, was focused on us, offering congratulations and toasting our engagement. In that moment, it felt like I had won. For the first time in years, I was the one standing in the spotlight. Little did I know, the fallout was just beginning. Mia's wedding was everything she had dreamed of, and made sure everyone else knew it. The vineyard was straight out of a fairy tale, with rows of lush grapevines and a backdrop of rolling hills glowing under the late afternoon sun. Fairy lights twinkled from tree branches, casting a warm, romantic glow over the venue. Everywhere I looked, there were signs of Mia's meticulous attention to detail: personalized wine bottle favors, flower arrangements spilling over with blush roses and eucalyptus, and a towering white cake adorned with sugar flowers. From the moment I arrived, I could feel the energy radiating off Mia. She was in her element, gliding from one group of guests to the next, her sequined gown shimmering in the light. Her smile was wide and practiced, her laugh just loud enough to turn heads. Everyone was there for her, and she made sure they knew it. I stayed in the background, careful not to draw too much attention to myself. The last thing I needed was Mia getting suspicious. But even as I made polite conversation with aunts and cousins, I couldn't stop the nervous excitement building in my chest. The plan was set. The stage was hers for now, but soon it would be mine. The ceremony itself was, I'll admit, beautiful. Mia and Liam stood under a floral arch, reciting their vows as the sun dipped behind the hills. It was the kind of scene that belonged in a wedding magazine, and for a brief moment I felt a twinge of guilt. She looked genuinely happy, her face soft and radiant as she promised forever to Liam. But then I remembered the years of comments, the constant comparisons, and the birthday that had been ripped out from under me. Whatever guilt, I felt dissolved into resolve. This wasn't about ruining her day. It was about reclaiming a piece of myself that she'd taken. As the ceremony ended and the guests began to filter toward the reception area, I caught Ryan's eye. He gave me a small nod, his expression calm and steady. It's all going to work out, he murmured when he found me near the hors d'oeuvres table. I know, I said, more to convince myself than him. By the time the reception began, I was jittery with anticipation. Mia and Liam entered the tent to thunderous applause, launching straight into their first dance. They moved across the dance floor in perfect harmony, the music swelling dramatically as Mia's dress sparkled under the lights. Everyone was watching them with rapt attention, and for a moment, I felt the familiar sting of being overshadowed. But then the music faded, and the toasts began. The maid of honor went first, delivering a heartfelt speech about Mia's grace and leadership, which almost made me choke on my champagne. Liam's best man followed with a more lighthearted speech that had everyone laughing and clinking their glasses. And then it was our turn. Ryan stood, clearing his throat. The room quieted, all eyes turning to him. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears as he began to speak. I just wanted to take a moment to say how inspiring it's been to witness Mia and Liam's love today, Ryan said, his voice steady and sincere. It's a reminder of how beautiful it is to find someone you want to spend the rest of your life with. Mia smiled, clearly pleased with the compliment, but her expression shifted as Ryan turned to me. And it's reminded me of something I've been meaning to do, he continued, reaching into his pocket. The room collectively held its breath as he dropped to one knee. Will you marry me? He asked, holding out a ring that sparkled as brilliantly as Mia's dress. For a moment, everything froze. Then, the room exploded in applause and cheers. I could barely hear Ryan over the noise, but my answer was immediate and tearful. Yes, I said, throwing my arms around him as he slipped the ring onto my finger. The crowd surged toward us, offering congratulations and clinking glasses in celebration. I could feel the warmth of their approval, the way the energy in the room had shifted to us. For the first time in years, I was the one people were celebrating. But not everyone was clapping. When I finally glanced toward Mia, I saw her standing frozen near the head table. Her smile had vanished, replaced with an expression of barely contained fury. Linda was whispering frantically in her ear, her face pale, while my dad stood stiffly, his lips pressed into a thin line. As the crowd swirled around me and Ryan, I caught Mia's eye. Her glare could have cut through steel. For a moment, I thought she might march over and confront me right then and there, but instead, she turned sharply and disappeared into the crowd. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Guests alternated between congratulating Mia and Liam on their wedding and Ryan and me on our engagement. I couldn't stop smiling, my hand constantly drifting to the ring on my finger. For once, I felt seen. But as I lay in bed that night, replaying the events of the day, I couldn't shake the look on Mia's face. She wasn't just angry, she was furious in a way I had never seen before. A part of me thrilled at the idea that I had finally gotten under her skin. But another part wondered what the fallout would look like when the dust finally settled. I could feel the tension long before Mia confronted me. Even as guests surrounded Ryan and me with hugs and congratulations, the weight of Mia's anger pressed down on me like a storm cloud. Every time I glanced in her direction, I saw her trying to maintain a strained smile, but the fury in her eyes was unmistakable. My dad's disapproving glances only added to the unease. He didn't say a word to me during the reception, but the way he avoided eye contact spoke volumes. Despite the tension, Ryan and I basked in the glow of the moment. For once, people were focusing on me, celebrating my happiness instead of Mia's. Guests raised glasses to us, showered us with well wishes, and commented on how romantic Ryan's proposal was. For the first time in years, I felt like I was more than just Mia's overlooked little sister. But the high didn't last long. Later that evening, as the crowd began to thin, Mia cornered me in the hallway outside the restrooms. Her face was a mask of barely controlled rage. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. I folded my arms, keeping my tone calm and sweet. "How dare I what?" Her eyes narrowed. "You couldn't even let me have one day. One day that was supposed to be about me." I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Oh, you mean like my 18th birthday? When you announced your pregnancy and stole the spotlights?" Her face flushed crimson. "That was different," she snapped. "I didn't plan that." "Sure you didn't," I interrupted, my voice turning colder. "But somehow, you always manage to make everything about you, don't you?" "Well, guess what, Mia? Not this time." She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. I watched as her fury morphed into frustration, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. I hope you're happy with yourself, she finally spat. You've ruined everything. I shrugged and walked away, leaving her standing there fuming. For once, I felt like I had the upper hand. The next morning, the fallout hit me head-on. My phone rang early, the sharp tone breaking the peaceful silence of my morning. It was my dad. Good morning to you too, I said, trying to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. Don't start, he said sharply. We need to talk about what happened last night. I sighed, already bracing myself. What about it? You were out of line, he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. A wedding isn't the same as a birthday. What you did was selfish and disrespectful. I felt my chest tighten, a mix of anger and hurt bubbling to the surface. Selfish? Dad, do you even hear yourself? She's been pulling this kind of crap for years, and you've never said a word. But the moment I stand up for myself, suddenly I'm the problem. This isn't about the past, he snapped. This is about what you did last night. That was her wedding, her day. And you decided to make it about you. She made my birthday about her. I shot back, my voice rising. She's never cared about my feelings, so why should I care about hers? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When my dad finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. I'm disappointed in you, kiddo. I thought you were better than this. The words hit harder than I expected, even though I should have seen them coming. Before I could respond, he hung up, leaving me staring at my phone in stunned silence. The rest of the day felt surreal. My dad's words replayed in my head over and over, each repetition stinging more than the last. For years, I'd been desperate for his approval, trying to prove that I was just as worthy of his pride as Mia. But now it felt like I'd lost him entirely. Ryan tried to comfort me, reminding me that we'd done nothing wrong. You deserve to be happy too, he said as we sat together on the couch. If your dad can't see that, that's on him. I nodded. But the truth was more complicated. Part of me felt justified. This was the payback Mia deserved, and I wasn't sorry for standing up for myself. But another part of me wondered if I'd gone too far. The fallout had only just begun, and I had no idea how deep the cracks would go. It didn't take long for the news of Ryan's proposal to spread through the family like wildfire. By the time I woke up the morning after the wedding, my phone was buzzing nonstop with texts, missed calls, and even a few social media tags. Reactions were split right down the middle. My mom, who had divorced my dad years ago but still kept tabs on the family drama through mutual friends, was the first to call. I heard what happened, she said, her voice tinged with amusement. I winced, bracing myself for judgment. Yeah, I guess you did. She laughed, a genuine, belly-deep laugh. Honestly? Good for you. She's been walking all over you for years. I don't care what anyone says. She deserved it. I couldn't help but smile, relief washing over me. I thought you'd be mad. Mad? Please, she scoffed. Mia's been the center of attention for as long as I can remember. It's about time someone knocked her down a peg. Hearing that from my mom gave me a much-needed boost. For so long, I'd been used to my dad defending Mia, making me feel like I was the problem. Having someone on my side, someone who knew the full context, felt validating. But not everyone was as understanding. By mid-afternoon, I got a call from my dad. He wasted no time getting to the point. Mia and Linda don't want you at the honeymoon brunch, he said, his tone cold and businesslike. I didn't even try to hide my sarcasm. What a shock. It's for the best, he continued, ignoring my tone. You've caused enough damage already. Damage. I repeated, anger flaring in my chest. What about the damage she's caused me over the years? Or, do you not care about that? Don't start, he snapped. You know this isn't about the past. What you did at the wedding was out of line. I can't defend you this time. Of course you can't, I said bitterly. You've never defended me when it comes to Mia. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he finally said, maybe it's better if we take some space for now. I hung up without another word. My dad's words stung, but they didn't surprise me. Mia had always been his golden child, and no amount of explanation was going to change that. Ryan and I spent the day of the honeymoon brunch doing exactly what Mia and Linda didn't want me to do, celebrating our engagement. We had brunch at a cute cafe in town, spent the afternoon picking out a few potential wedding venues online, and capped the evening off with champagne and takeout. For once, I felt like I was the one being celebrated, and it was a damn good feeling. But the fallout didn't stop there. Mia, ever the drama queen, made it her personal mission to turn the extended family against me. She framed the proposal as a deliberate attack on her, spinning a narrative that painted me as a bitter, jealous sister who couldn't handle seeing her happy. She's always been like this, she told one cousin, according to a text I later received. Ever since we were kids, she's been so competitive. I just wanted to enjoy my wedding, and she couldn't even let me have that. It worked, too. Several family members stopped responding to my messages, while others sent me passive-aggressive texts about learning to share the spotlights or putting family first. At first, it bothered me. I hated the idea of people believing Mia's version of events without even hearing my side. But as the days passed, I realized I didn't care as much as I thought I would. For years, I'd been trying to win the approval of people who had always favored Mia, and it had gotten me nowhere. Standing up for myself, for once, felt better than bending over backward to please them.
Not everyone was against me, though.
A few cousins reached out to say they thought what I'd done was hilarious. One even admitted that she'd been rooting for someone to call Mia out for years. Honestly, it's iconic. One text read, "She's not as perfect as she thinks she is, and it's about time someone reminded her of that." Knowing I had allies, even if they were a silent minority, helped. It reminded me that not everyone saw Mia through the rose-colored glasses my dad and Linda wore. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd reclaimed some of my power. I wasn't just Mia's overshadowed little sister anymore. I was someone who had finally stood up for herself, consequences be damned. And as far as I was concerned, it felt damn good. In the months following Mia's wedding, I threw myself into planning my future with Ryan. Between venue visits, cake tastings, and discussions about guest lists, I was busier than ever. But no matter how much I tried to focus on my engagement, the lingering tension with my family was always there, gnawing at the edges of my happiness. My dad had all but stopped speaking to me. When he did, it was curt and distant, like he was talking to a colleague instead of his daughter. Family gatherings were tense, with conversations carefully tiptoeing around anything wedding-related. Mia, of course, continued to fan the flames. She made a point of being overly cheerful in my presence, loudly sharing updates about her life that seemed designed to make me feel excluded. I'd expected some fallout from the proposal, but I hadn't anticipated just how deeply it would fracture my relationship with my dad. For weeks, I replayed our last conversation in my mind, wondering if I should have handled things differently. The turning point came on an ordinary Tuesday evening when my phone buzzed with a text from an unexpected sender. Liam. "Hey, can we talk?" it read. I hesitated. Liam had always been polite but distant toward me, more a side character in Mia's orbit than someone I really knew. Curious, I agreed, and we ended up meeting for coffee at a quiet cafe later that week. I wanted to say something at the wedding, but it didn't feel like the right time, he began, stirring his coffee absently. "Honestly, I get why you did what you did." I blinked, stunned. "You do?" He nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Mia has a way of making things about her. Always has. Don't get me wrong, I love her, but I've seen it. She can be overwhelming." Hearing him say that felt like a weight lifting off my chest. For so long, I'd felt like the only person who saw Mia's true nature, but here was someone else, her own husband, acknowledging it. "I don't think what you did was right," Liam continued, his tone gentle, "but I understand it. And honestly, it's not like Mia's innocent in all this. I think she knows that too, deep down." His words stayed with me long after our conversation ended. For the first time, I felt like someone in Mia's corner actually understood my perspective. Encouraged by Liam's honesty, I decided to reach out to my dad. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but the silence between us was becoming unbearable. I called him one evening, my hands trembling as I held the phone to my ear. He picked up on the third ring. "Hi, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause. "Hi?" The awkwardness was palpable, but I pushed through. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," I began, "and I wanted to say, I'm not proud of how I handled things at the wedding." He didn't respond, but I could hear him breathing on the other end, so I continued. "I know it wasn't the right time or place, and I'm sorry for putting you in a difficult position. But, Dad, I needed her to understand how it feels. To be ignored. To have your moment taken away. I've been dealing with that for years, and I hit my breaking point." There was a long silence before he finally spoke. "You should have come to me," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I could have helped." "Could you, though?" I asked gently. "You've always defended her, Dad. Even when she's hurt me." He sighed deeply, the sound filled with exhaustion. "You're not wrong," he admitted. "I haven't handled things perfectly. But two wrongs don't make a right, kiddo." "I know," I said quietly. I want us to move forward. I miss you." His voice softened. "I miss you too." The conversation wasn't a magical fix, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, my dad and I exchanged more texts and phone calls, slowly rebuilding our relationship. Things were still tense when Mia was involved, but I felt like we were finally on a path toward reconciliation. As for Mia, she remained as icy as ever. But for the first time, I didn't feel the need to prove anything to her. I had Ryan, I had my mom, and now I had a small sliver of hope that my dad and I could repair what had been broken. If I thought Mia would let the drama from her wedding blow over, I was sorely mistaken. In typical Mia fashion, she turned the fallout into a spectacle, making sure everyone knew exactly how wronged she felt. It started with the little digs, pointed remarks at family gatherings that stopped just short of outright accusations, leaving everyone uncomfortable but unwilling to call her out. Then came the social media posts. "Some people don't understand boundaries," she wrote one day, accompanied by a stock photo of a wedding cake. The timing was too coincidental to be about anyone else. Another time, she posted an old family photo of the two of us as kids, captioned, "Back when people knew their place." She even tagged me, as if to ensure I couldn't miss it. I ignored her. Reacting would only give her the satisfaction of knowing she'd gotten under my skin. But it was clear she was trying to provoke me, hoping I'd retaliate so she could play the victim again. One afternoon, I got a text from her that stopped me in my tracks. "I hope you're happy with yourself," it read. "Dad isn't the same anymore." I stared at the message, anger and guilt warring in my chest. It was classic Mia, manipulative, calculated, and designed to make me feel like the villain. And the worst part? It worked. I hadn't spoken to my dad much since our conversation a few weeks ago. Things were improving, but the relationship still felt fragile, like a glass teetering on the edge of a table. The thought that my actions might have permanently damaged our bond was enough to make my stomach churn. Still, I knew better than to engage with Mia directly. Instead, I showed the text to Ryan that evening as we cooked dinner. "She's trying to get under your skin," he said after reading it. "That's all this is." "I know," I said, setting the phone down. "But what if she's right? What if I've messed things up with my dad for good?" Ryan wrapped an arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. "You didn't mess anything up. Your dad loves you, and he's trying. Don't let Mia make you second-guess yourself. She thrives on that." I nodded, grateful for his support, but the guilt lingered. The next time I saw my dad, I couldn't help but analyze his every word and action, searching for cracks in our fragile truce. We met for lunch at a quiet diner, a rare moment of normalcy that I didn't want to ruin. "How's Ryan?" he asked, cutting into a sandwich. "He's good," I said, smiling. "We've been looking at wedding venues." His lips twitched into a brief smile. "That's great. You guys excited?" I nodded, my heart lifting slightly at his interest. "Yeah, it's been fun. Stressful, but fun." There was a pause, and then he set down his fork. "Listen, kiddo, I know things have been tense lately, but I want you to know I'm trying. I don't want this to come between us." My throat tightened, and I nodded quickly. "Me too, Dad." It wasn't a perfect moment. There were still unspoken tensions and unresolved feelings, but it was progress. Despite my efforts to focus on rebuilding my relationship with my dad and planning my wedding with Ryan, Mia's words continued to haunt me. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the weight of the day settled in, I'd replay the events of her wedding in my mind. Had I gone too far? Was there a better way to handle things? Ryan always reassured me that I had done what I needed to do to stand up for myself, and deep down I believed him. But there was a part of me that couldn't shake the guilt entirely. I didn't regret standing up for myself, but I couldn't ignore the damage it had caused. Still, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let Mia's games consume me. For too long, I'd let her dictate how I felt about myself. It was time to put her behind me and focus on the life I was building with Ryan, a life where, for once, I came first. The realization didn't come all at once. It crept in gradually, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds after a long, exhausting downpour. I couldn't keep living my life in reaction to Mia. The anger and resentment I'd carried for years had weighed me down more than I'd realized, and holding on to it wasn't hurting her. It was hurting me. Ryan was the first to point it out, gently but firmly. "I know you've been through a lot with Mia," he said one evening as we sat together, wedding plans spread out on the coffee table. "But you can't let her have this much power over you. This is our time now. Let's focus on that." He was right. Every time I thought about Mia, it pulled me away from the joy I should have been feeling as I planned my wedding with the person I loved. I didn't want her to overshadow yet another important milestone in my life. And so I made a decision. I was letting go. Not forgiving, not forgetting, but moving on. The first real test of that decision came when Ryan and I finalized our guest list. Cutting Mia felt both obvious and monumental. I knew she wouldn't want to come anyway, her pride wouldn't allow it, but not inviting her made a statement. It was a line in the sand, one that said I was done pretending we had a relationship that didn't exist. When I told my dad, he sighed heavily but didn't argue. "You both need time," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I just hope someday you'll figure it out." "I don't think we ever will, Dad," I admitted, my voice softer than I expected. "And that's okay. Some relationships aren't meant to be fixed." He nodded slowly, his disappointment evident but muted. I could tell he wanted to push back, to encourage me to keep trying, but he also knew it wasn't his battle to fight. With that decision made, I threw myself into wedding planning with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time, I felt like I was truly in control of my own happiness. Ryan and I toured venues, sampled cakes, and spent hours agonizing over the perfect song for our first dance. Every detail was a celebration of us, a life built on love, respect, and partnership. The day of our wedding was everything I'd ever hoped for. It was small, intimate, and filled with people who genuinely cared about us. My dad walked me down the aisle, his pride shining through as he smiled at me. Ryan's vows brought tears to my eyes, and when we shared our first dance as husband and wife, I felt a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. Mia's absence was a quiet relief. There were no passive-aggressive comments, no tension simmering beneath the surface. Just love, joy, and the sense that I had finally stepped out from her shadow. Looking back, I don't regret what I did at her wedding. It wasn't the most mature way to handle things, but it was the catharsis I needed at the time. It forced me to confront years of hurt and resentment, to finally stand up for myself in a way I hadn't been able to before. Mia will probably always see me as the villain, and that's something I've made peace with. She has her narrative, and I have mine, and neither of us is likely to change our perspective anytime soon. But for the first time in years, I feel free. Free from the competition I never signed up for, free from the need to prove myself to her, or anyone else. I'm building a life with Ryan that's entirely ours, and for the first time, I truly feel like my own person.